Hey guys, Jim here. I do a lot of work every day with plugins and sample libraries and virtual instruments, and obviously a lot of legacy MIDI hardware from back in the 80s and 90s. And I'm always looking for the ideal MIDI controller for under my hand. I typically play with my right hand as I'm entering parts, and I'm always working with some kind of MIDI fader box with my left hand for controlling things like vibrato and expression and all that kind of thing. And there have been a steady stream of attempted solutions at this over the years, gosh, going back decades, and nobody has ever gotten it right, and that baffles me. Back in the, mid-90s, Peavey made a box called the PC1600X. Some of the smarter composers I know have snatched those up. They still use them 25, 30 years later. Those boxes were incredible because they gave you a ton of customizable MIDI control over all kinds of things, typical MIDI CCs, even system exclusive data. But in the intervening years, there have just been a steady stream of really, really junky, cheap plastic devices like the Korg Nano Control. I know a lot of guys like these things. I hate them. The faders are uselessly short for writing, any kind of expressive data. That just doesn't work for me. They're cheap plastic, and so I am looking for a better alternative. So I started a thread a few months ago on vicontrol.net. If you're not familiar with it, check it out. It's a really, really cool forum for composers. In fact, people like Hans Zimmer hang out there all the time. But anyway, in this thread, I talked about some of the things that I want in my ultimate MIDI fader unit. And off the top of my head, or my notes in this case, high-end, smooth, quiet faders. I've played some faders before that they're, they might feel decent, but they're noisy when you move them. I wanted a Rolls-Royce quality metal build with, ideally, nice wooden sides, no cheap plastic, something that sits on your desk that it feels and looks like an instrument, something you want to work with all the time. A high-res color screen above the faders so that I could have custom names, parameter values, color coding, and so on. The Fader Premium checks all that. I wanted a box that's class compliant, doesn't require any drivers or third-party software, because I've seen it a million times. Somebody comes out with a really cool box, but it's got all this third-party software, and next thing you know, it's abandoned 2 years later, and you've got a $1,000 paperweight on your desk. Last thing, ideally, it's easy to program by itself. It'd be nice to program it without even having to use an app. And at the same time, it is nice to have an editor app. I just don't want anything that is dependent on software. So the Fader Premium is the only box I've ever seen yet in more than 2 decades that checks every one of those boxes. In fact, it goes further than all that, and I'll show you that when we jump into it. I ultimately want an 8-channel unit, 8 faders, because that's what I tend to use. But I decided to take the chance on the Fader Premium after talking with Mike Phillips. Man, what a guy! He's super kind, really responsive. We went back and forth for several weeks about my wish list. I got this thing yesterday, played with it for a little while, gave him some feedback, and I happened to mention that I would love to have more than 8 user profiles available. He wrote a custom firmware overnight for me, and now I've got in my inbox a new firmware update that gives me 16 profile slots, which is important for me because I want to be able to control everything in my studio, ideally, from this box. So, the Fader Premium by MusioTech. Obviously, I'll show you some close-up shots here in a second, but man, just so far, the build is gorgeous. It's metal, really thick gauge steel. The faders are Alps, high-end Alps console faders. They're really, really quiet and smooth. Really, really high-quality switches on the back. There's these buttons on the top. So let's dive in, and I will give you kind of the tour from over the shoulder. Let's check it out. Okay, so I've got the Fader Premium on my desk, and the microphone is right out of frame, but I want you to hear again how quiet the faders are. I mean, they're basically silent. Really smooth. Obviously, you can't feel what I'm feeling, but these faders feel as good as any I've ever played with on a high-end console. So, all right, let's turn it on. So in the back, there are two switches. One is for programming, which is really nice. The other is a power button. All right, so you are now looking at a freshly updated Fader Premium with version 623, which I believe is called the Special Edition. Mike very generously sent me this in the middle of this review because I had talked about, in fact, I had filmed a whole section where I talked about the downsides of this unit. Those are all gone now. One of my complaints was that you'll see the names I've put in here. Let's see, in this scene it's called standard CCs. If we go up to this one, Spitfire 1, Spitfire mics. Like for example here, I now have more meaningful parameter names. Close, the tree mics, the ambient mics, and the outriggers. In the previous version, you only had 3 characters that you could use to name each fader, and they had to be all capitals and no numbers. Now you've got both uppercase and lowercase. You can use numbers, and then it also, you see here, 22, 23, 24, 25. Those are these CC assignments that I've got set for those faders. That's a new addition as well. So huge, huge update. May not seem like much, but it makes a big deal being able to have both uppercase, lowercase letters, 4 characters now instead of 3, numbers, and so on. Also, Mike just emailed me and told me that he is now trying to figure out a way to get up to 7 character parameter names. I don't know how he's going to do it with that little bit of space there. He says he thinks he has a way, so we'll see what he comes up with. But the point is, it's really, really cool of him to just, you know, basically overnight a new update in response to some suggestions. So let's go back to my main scene, which is scene number 1, standard CCs, and I will show you a little bit of what it's like to program directly on the unit. If you, for some reason, don't have the app handy, I'm not sure why you would. If you're connected to a computer, it means that you're connected to a computer, and you probably have the app nearby. But if for some reason you want to program directly on the unit, you can do that. But let me just walk you through some of the main things. What you got to do is back here, you press and hold the switch, and now you've got these 4 options. Change scene, and I can do that just by doing this. I can move the fader and scroll through my scenes. So there's, I've only got 7 scenes in here right now. 7, 6, 5, blah, blah, blah. So you can do that. You can change views. I prefer the modern column view, but let's look at a few of those. Here's a scene overview. That I'm not sure why you would use that, because it doesn't show you any values. It just shows you, you know, what your assignments are. So let's, and here's another way to do that. You can just double tap that little up arrow button, and that'll change views as well. Here, same thing, but you get the animation. CCs, there again, I'm not sure why this one exists. It doesn't show you anything. It just shows you your labels. Numbers, this one is a horizontal display. I don't like horizontal because it doesn't relate, it doesn't correlate to what you're doing with your faders. Columns is what you see. Fills the whole screen. I also like the display refresh rate. This thing is really smooth. I hope you can see that on the video. Hope it translates. But this display is gorgeous. Columns and numbers. This uses the entire display as well. Nice high-res display. Modern columns is the one I like, only because it also shows you the name of the scene that you've got called up. In my case, this is scene number 1, standard CCs. Obviously, you get a reduced column height there. Let's go back to that previous one. If you don't care about seeing the scene name, that kind of fills the screen more. We already saw modern columns. Bars, same thing but horizontal. Bars and numbers, horizontal but with parameter values. Leaping CCs, this is kind of creative, but it doesn't show you the parameter values. RPM, this is fun. I mean, it definitely looks cool. The only problem with this particular view is that it jumps. I mean, if you're moving multiple faders at once, it really jumps around a lot. However, RPM times 4 solves that problem. Lets you see all 4 parameters in a really cool rotary, looks like a speedometer. Very cool. I forget what this scene does. I haven't really looked into it. It's kind of a just a fun Star Trek oriented thing. I don't even want to mess with that because I don't know what it is. But Mike has videos on his site, which I'll link down in my description that go into detail about all this stuff. Blank is, funny enough, blank. Scene overview. Okay, so that's back to the beginning. So let me go back to my... Let's see, numbers, which column? Modern columns, that's me. Okay, now let's look more at some of these other parameters. You can edit a scene right from here. So here's the scene editor. Hit OK. So now you can edit right from the box. I'm not going to go into detail here. I'm going to just link to Mike's video because he does a great job of really going through every step of how this editor works, and it's really, really cool. The point is you can do everything you need to do right from the unit. You don't have to use the app. Now, I'm not sure why you'd want to do that if you've got the app available, but it's a great option to have. So I want to go back to, whoops, I'm going through my scenes. No changes made. Okay, so let's go back. Whoops. All right, so let's look at some more stuff. Let's go into options. So now in scenes, we can edit scenes. We can do a quick scene edit. And I'm going to say no because Mike covers that in his website. More options. What's more options? This stuff is explained in the manual. It's hard to explain here. Button nav lets you change the behavior of the button in the back. It lets you go up and down in your scenes by using that button. I'm going to leave this stuff alone. Let's go to more options again. Whoops, I was already in there. Go back another level. You can see how easy it is to get around here. So scenes, globals. Let's look at globals. And by the way, if you haven't figured it out already, these numbers correspond to faders. So if I wanted to get into the MIDI stuff, I would have used fader 1. Let's go back. Let's go to colors. That's fader number 3. So global colors. If we wanted to change our global color theme, let's hit OK. So we got all of these crazy color themes, which you can really get into. I'm just going to stick with standard. But yeah, the point is, man, you've got all kinds of crazy options in here to customize this thing to look the way you want. You also can create your own custom color themes, which I'm not going to do at the moment. Click to select. Okay, so I'm back on that. We can also change the color of our buttons. So let's edit those. We can change them from white to blue, green, turquoise, pink, custom, and so on. I'm going to leave mine. The green's kind of cool. But I'm going to just leave mine on white because I like the buttons white since everything else has colors. So we've got that. What else? More. Okay, last little bit of stuff here. System. Number 1, faders. We can choose how sensitive our faders are. Depending on your DAW, you might want to adjust this, but Default is to leave it on high. Guidance, hard to explain. You'll have to look at the manual for this, but it basically gives you some options for helping you get around the GUI here a little bit. Let's go to back. Icon, text, and titles. I'm leaving those alone. More. Whoops, I was already in there. Messages. Let's see, I already did all that. Guidance, GUI. Screensaver. This is fun. I'm going to choose, let's see, and here's one little complaint. I wish there were a way to preview what these screensavers look like. Okay, so here we have the Matrix screensaver. Now, how many MIDI fader boxes do you know that have a screensaver, let alone a Matrix one? Very cool. Necessary? Of course not, but just one of the many little nice touches that Mike put into this thing. There's a lot of things like this, actually, when you start digging into the OS, but I gotta say, that was a really cool surprise. So that's just kind of a general overview of getting around. Oops, I meant to... There's one more thing there, device. We can go to about, and that's going to show me my current OS. I'm running 623 Special Edition, and so on. So, and then you can do a factory reset from here as well. So that's basically the over-the-shoulder look at programming, getting around on this thing. Could not be more simple. And again, you can do everything right from the unit, but the app, which I'm about to show you, obviously way easier to use the app and does pretty much everything you'd want to do except for the custom color and GUI stuff and screensavers. That stuff you need to do on here. But there you go. There's a quick over-the-shoulder tour of getting around on the Fader Premium. Oh, I forgot. I also wanted to show you a couple of my other scenes that I've got programmed. So my first scene here, which I call standard CCs, the stuff that you use with pretty much any sample library. CC11, which is expression, 1, which is mod wheel, and then I've got my two typical vibrato controls. Some libraries use CC2, the Spitfire ones tend to use CC21, so that's how I've got my first scene set up. Scene number 2 is dedicated to Spitfire. CC15 and 16 I assign to different things in the contact interface depending on what I need at the moment. But 17 and 18, especially for string libraries, tends to be release time and tightness. I use those controls a lot. Also, Spitfire, I've got my 4 mic positions set up. So I can mix my mic positions right here without having to mess around on screen. I got my close mics, my tree mics, my ambient mics, and my outriggers. Really great to have mix control right here on this box without having to mess around with the, you know, anytime I can do anything with something tactile instead of messing with a mouse, it just is so much more musical and it feels like I'm working with an instrument. So that's that. Now on to synthesizer stuff. I've got my Oberheim filter, and of course I use these CCs with pretty much any of my plugins as well. My Oberheim OB-X8 is on the other side of my room, and sometimes I'll wheel myself over to it, but if I'm going really fast, sometimes I just want to edit some basic stuff right here. So I've got my filter controls, cutoff, resonance, filter mod, and oscillator detune. Next page is my oscillator levels, oscillator 1 and 2, the noise oscillator, and then cross mod between oscillators 1 and 2. I always use that. And then my 2 envelopes, amplitude envelope and filter envelope. Attack, decay, sustain, release. So there again, whether I'm working with an analog synth or one of my many plugins, it's just so nice to have everything right here under my fingers, always doing the same things consistently. Just a really, really cool box. So that's the quick over-the-shoulder tour. Okay, so here is the editor app, and it says no device found. Connect a fader and refresh. That's because I've turned it off. So let's turn it back on. Give it a second to boot. Let's make music. Columns and numbers. Okay, so we're still not connected to the app. So what we have to do is pop over here to the app and refresh. There we go. So we're back in. It says fader connected and we're in business. So let's just jump around here a little bit. Here's where you can name your preset. There are 8 by default on the device. Again, Mike has sent me a beta version that bumps it up to 16, which I haven't done that update yet. So anyway, let's give this a different name. Let's call it example. And now let's change some CCs. So these are my standards, but let's say I wanted to do something different. Let's do CC1 and change this one to CC11. And then here we can give them a name. So you want to call it something else. Oh, now it's now this is mod. So let's call that mod. And this is expression. And then I have my 2 go-to vibrato controls for most sample libraries. They tend to use either 2 or 21. So I don't know why I named these slightly different, really. I'll just call them both. Whoops. Now see how it's red there? That tells me I've exceeded the character limit. It needs to be 3 characters. And then we can change our MIDI channel of each fader. I'm going to leave them all at 1. And then I have a, what do you call it? Fader limit. I'm going to leave these all at 127. Now, if we click on something, we're entering fader mode, which means I could actually change what's happening on screen by moving the fader, which is super cool, super handy. And I can do that with any of these parameters. Oh, let's go back to 1. Let's change our MIDI channel to channel 12 on that fader if we wanted to, and change it back to 1. For some reason, if we wanted this fader to max out at 100, we could do that. Come on, there we go. So yeah, you can edit either by typing directly. Let's put in, whoops, man, I'm butterfingers today. Goodness sakes, 127. All right, so I've created this profile. Now say I want to send it to the unit. I can either send all to the fader unit or I can send just this one scene. If I click here, it'll do it, but I don't want to mess up my scene, so I'm not going to do it. You can also get scenes from the Fader Premium, or you can get all scenes from the Fader Premium. So you can go both ways. You can also do you can do entire backups here. If you do backup restore, if I want to back up the entire state of my unit, I can give it a name and save a backup file. I can also restore from a previous backup. So that's cool and important. What else? What else? Let's see, options. You've got show tooltips, extra help messages. You can play sounds, indicator sounds. You can choose your destination folders for scenes and backups. So it's very simple. You can do everything pretty much that you want to do, other than some of the things like screensavers and all that kind of thing. That you have to do directly on the unit as of now. But yeah, that's basically it. This is the editing app. Does everything you need it to do. Super simple, very lightweight and efficient app. Let's go to the next scene, filter, oscillator levels. See, these are the scenes I've already saved yesterday when I first got the unit. So I'm going to close this and jump back out and we'll talk some more. So ultimately, there's just really nothing else on the market that checks all the boxes that the Fader Premium does. The only thing that's close is the Audio Imperia Fade, which looks really, really cool. It's priced reasonably. It's $349. I think it's $349 or $399. And similar form and function to the Fader Premium. It's got 4 faders. It's got a screen. It's got 4 profile slots in that one. Now there are 8 in the standard Fader Premium, but now with this new firmware, there's 16. But the other thing is that the Fader Premium just takes the concept much further. Way more customizable. It's got a color high-res screen versus a monochrome screen, so you can do color coding. It takes the concept to the extreme and does everything I would want it to do. Okay, so I've had the Fader Premium for over a week now, so I wanted to come back, give you my honest thoughts, and wrap this thing up with a few details that I haven't covered yet. Funny enough, a week ago, I did a wrap-up where I talked about the downsides of the Fader Premium. Well, in that week, Mike Phillips has addressed all my concerns. He's sent me two firmware updates, which have addressed everything that I asked for. And so at this point, there's very little to talk about in terms of downsides. I will say this, when you first take it out of the box and plug it in and turn it on, it's not immediately intuitive about how to get around on the thing in terms of programming it without the app. You do have to read the manual, but it's just a matter of figuring out the button conventions, you know, how many clicks it takes to do certain things. And once you do that, once you look at the manual, takes all of 5 minutes to get your head around it. It really is a simple box. There's not a whole lot to it. There's a lot in there actually, but in terms of getting around, it's just a matter of learning the conventions. Other than that, I want to talk about what some people are inevitably going to ask. Is it motorized? Does it have motorized faders? Is it a DAW controller? No, it does not have motorized faders. It's not meant to be a DAW controller. And so I actually prefer it this way. Now, there are some who would say, well, it'd be great if it could be all-in-one and have motorized faders so that you could use it as an automation, fader controller for your audio workstations. Personally, I don't want that. I've already got that. Most of us already have some kind of fader controller, whether it's a one fader unit like a Behringer X-Touch 1, that's what I use, and I absolutely love that thing. I've got it off to my right side under my right hand because when I'm writing automation, well, for one thing, I'm right-handed, so I like having that controller on my right side, specifically dedicated to that task. On the other hand, when I'm playing parts in, especially orchestral parts, solo lines, I'm playing them with my right hand. So I want my fader controller, in this case the Fader Premium, I want it under my left hand so that I can be doing both at the same time. I want to be able to play my part with my right hand and control expression and vibrato and whatever other stuff I'm doing with my left hand, whether it be filter cutoff, if I'm working with a synth part or whatever. So to me, the perfect MIDI fader controller for this kind of thing, I like having them separate. I like having two separate units. So I want the Fader Premium on my left and my automation controller on my right when I'm doing mixing, automation, that kind of thing. I've always been frustrated when they're all in one because then you end up having to constantly switch modes and it just doesn't work. In a perfect world, I like having them as two separate units. So to me, the fact that it's not motorized, that's a plus. It's not trying to be all things to all people. It's not trying to be a DAW controller and a MIDI controller at the same time. So to me, that's not a con. Just letting you know that they are two different things for two different, jobs. So last thing, if I really tried to come up with another negative, it would be that it's expensive. It's not a cheap MIDI fader box. Again, there have been a million of them over the years, and all of them have nothing but compromise. The one I had the last couple of years is a Novation launch control. I actually like that one. In terms of feel, for a plastic box, it feels really pretty good. But I can't tell you how important it is to have that screen directly correlated to the faders, above them, not off to the side, where you have to break that visual relationship. That screen is everything, being right there above your faders, telling you what each of them is assigned to, color-coded, and so on. It really, really takes the whole concept and puts a bow on it. So, yeah, I really can't say enough good stuff about it. I've been wishing for this box for at least the last 20 years. And again, it's the only one on the market that really gets it all right as far as I'm concerned. Again, the Audio Imperia unit Fade, it's close, and if you don't care about color coding and having more than 4 scenes, the Fader Premium now has 16 scenes. So, you know, that's your next step down. I think the faders are nicer. In fact, Mike is already talking about upgrading the faders yet again in another revision down the road. He's also working on an 8-channel concept, 8-fader concept. So, yeah, sorry to ramble, but that's basically it. I really can't think of anything else. And looking at my notes here, yeah, I've covered everything. The Fader Premium is as good as it gets, and to me, nothing touches it. It feels fantastic. It looks great. It's high quality. It's the new Rolls-Royce of MIDI fader controllers, and nothing else really comes close. Again, there's a lot of other things out there that are kind of similar in some ways. There's a lot of other 3 and 4 fader units. Some of them have displays, but if they do, they don't show you nearly as much information. The displays are sometimes off to the side, or they aren't color, so you can't do color coding, or they're very low resolution, you know, simple LCD screens. So, yeah, I think I've said everything I can possibly say about this thing. I hope you'll check out the Fader Premium. There's also, if you really, really have well-endowed pockets, there's a Fader Presidential, which is really up there in terms of price, but it's the absolute, you know, I don't know what's beyond Rolls-Royce. McLaren, it would be the McLaren of MIDI fader controllers. It's like polished gold and with metal fader caps and an even bigger screen. Same basic principle. Okay, hope you've enjoyed this. I've said quite enough. Please check out Mike's links. I've got everything down in the description. Please consider subscribing, and Mike, send me a bill, because there's no way I'm sending this thing back. It's way too good. This is what I've dreamed of in a fader controller for decades. And yeah, there you go. All right, thanks. Talk to you soon.